So first of all, thank you for joining our October webinar. I'm Louise Gardner. Many of you know me. I'm the founder and managing director of Pledge Consulting. And with us this afternoon, we have the great privilege of having Michael Alacqua. Michael is a portfolio delivery specialist, a lot of experience in PMOs, particularly in the area of delivering large-scale transformation projects and programs. About 4 years ago now, Michael turned his attention towards project portfolio management, particularly around supporting business transformation. Back in the day, Michael started his career at Osborne Computers, fixing PCs, and then spent 20 years working across many parts of Qantas. Also worked at NBN, Sydney Water, amongst others. Michael's got a very exciting chapter opening up next week when he starts at TAFE New South Wales supporting their transformation programme. Delighted to have you with us today, Michael. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you. I'll have to give you sharing permissions, I think. There you go. Yeah, you should be right now. Thanks, Michael.
Sorry about that. Everybody can hear me okay now?
Loud and clear. Yeah.
Sorry about the wait. All right, thank you, Louise, and thank you, everybody, for joining today. I really hope you get something out of it. I'll start the presentation. So let's do the screen share. Again, thank you, everybody. I hope you can see the presentation okay. And well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm really just here to share some of the experiences I've had and some of the learnings. And I really look forward to some robust discussion and some questions towards the end of the presentation. The presentation probably going to take 15, 20 minutes. I will start off and outline just some things to consider. And the context here is, if you're in the process of setting up a PMO, Portfolio Management Office, as part of a business change program, delivery program, it's more centered around business change and digital, but you can probably still apply some of the learnings to in an infrastructure PMO as well. So I'll start off with just some things to consider, and then there are some lessons I'd like to share towards the end of the presentation. So moving on. Okay, so I'll start off by saying I think there's a common belief in the marketplace that PMOs tend to struggle to get traction in organisations, and they generally last about 2 years before they lose their momentum and their value. So the question I'd like to try and discuss today or solve today is, how do we improve the likelihood of your PMO being effective? And in effective, it's becoming a true valued partner in an organisation and not another statistic. So how do we do that? So it's my basic hypothesis in all of this, in that you can improve your successes, you can improve your chances of successes if you're setting up the PMO and you're thinking about the business context, or you're making the PMO what I call fit for business. And that means a few things, and there's a couple of points I've got on the next slides to discuss that. But when you think about it, no two organisations are alike. No two organisations deliver the same sort of products, operate in the same markets, are facing the same challenges or legislative jurisdictions, or have different opportunities. So if no two organisations operate alike, we need to understand that. We really need to understand that, because that means that what they think of as value will be different for every organisation. So what worked in one organisation may not work in another organisation. So to jump into it, these are the three things that, in my view, you should consider or take into account when you're in the process of establishing a PMO, Portfolio Management Office, or at least reshaping the actual Portfolio Management Office. Three simple things. The ecosystem. So what is the business ecosystem? What is the unique situation? And I'll explore each one of these on the subsequent slides. Guides, best practice. We've all heard of best practice models. My view is they're great, but use them as a guide, use them as a starting place, somewhere to actually get your framework established. And number three is capability. So think about portfolio management as a capability, not as a department or a function. And if you take these things into account, it's my hypothesis that you've got a better chance of that PMO becoming a success. So the first one, the ecosystem. When we're talking about a business ecosystem, this is what I'm talking about. it looks very complex. But when you break down organisations, even simple organisations, this is kind of what you're facing. Inside the circle is the internal ecosystem, and it operates in an external ecosystem. This by no means is complete. I'm sure you can think of other things to fit inside and outside the circle, but it just gives you an idea that organisations operate in complex environments, complex ecosystems, and you need to understand this. And the reason why you need to understand these elements is because somewhere these organisations deliver some sort of value to the customers, but they deliver that value through these ecosystems. So you need to understand how does it deliver that particular value. And once you understand that, you've got a better chance of delivering a PMO that actually aligns to that. So this is what a business ecosystem tends to look like. Internally, things like culture, how the politics operate, the reward systems in the organisation, that generally drives behaviours. How is it structured? Is it structured along product lines? Is it structured along end-to-end value chains? The history of the organisation, very important. Have they tried to set up PMOs in the past? Were they a success? Were they not a success? Processes, do you have a robust process and systems architecture? How effective are those? All those things need to take into account. Externally, you can see there, who are the customers, who are the investors, what are the views of the unions, and how do they contribute to the organisation? A lot of organisations these days have a lot of things outsourced. So what are the outsourced, and what are those partnership relationships like as well? Who are the suppliers? How do the suppliers integrate? Are you well integrated, or are they quite distributed? Your competitors, what's the regulatory framework? All those things you need to take into account. The other thing is, what is a unique business situation? And what I mean by that, this is actually taken from a book called The First 90 Days. There's the book there, if you can see it on the video. There's a section in the book called Matching Strategy to Situation. And it basically says that organisations can fit into one of these 5 situations. That an organisation could be in a startup mode, could be in a turnaround mode, accelerated growth mode, realignment mode, or sustaining success mode. And it's important to understand where your organisation fits within that, because where the organisation fits tells us a little bit about what's important. And I'll give you some examples. If you're in a turnaround scenario, and in turnaround scenario, I mean the organisation is about to collapse, and they really have to turn around. So they've got that burning platform going for them. In a turnaround situation, it's not too difficult to get everybody aligned, because the messaging is quite clear. Get aligned, or we're all going to fail. But the priorities are generally executed quite rapidly and with a lot of rigor, and normally with a lot of strong direction coming from above. That organisation would operate significantly different to when you're in a realignment scenario. So if you're in a realignment scenario, generally there you have a need to change, but you've probably got audiences in that organisation that probably haven't quite got on board yet. Things that aren't important in a turnaround, so like I said, it's about getting things done very quickly, are probably going to be quite important in realignment. In a realignment situation, communication and aligning the business and creating the messaging and creating the need for change in a realignment is much more reliant than in a turnaround situation. And sustaining success isn't about rapidly deploying something, otherwise we won't survive. It's about where are the growth opportunities. So if your organisation, if you think about where your organisation is along that particular spectrum, it gives you some insight into what maybe your PMO should be focusing on. And if you want more information on that, there's a whole chapter in that book. Even if you're not in the position where you're starting a new role, I think it's a valuable book to read anyway. It's got a lot of really good insight. And that chapter really does give you some insight in determining how best to look at your particular situation. So if you take the ecosystem and if you take the business situation into account, there are two questions then, once you've gone through that process, is then the first question is how and what value does the organisation deliver to customers through that ecosystem and understanding the situation they're in? And then you've got to ask yourself, well, what can the PMO do to increase that value? So I guess the message here is take the time to understand the business that you're operating in. Take the time to understand what is the scenario, the situation that the business is actually operating. Once you're armed with that information, you've probably got better opportunity to actually look at, well, what can the PMO do to actually add to that? That's the first thing to consider. The other one is best practice models. My view is they're great. Best practice models are good as a guide, because for me, best means fit for business. And what best practice model might work in some government department in the UK somewhere may not be adequate for a startup in some other part of the world. So here are some things that, again, I just recommend that you're doing when you go through this process. You know, understand the best practice models. Like I said, they're not bad. They are very good. So really take some time to understand those models and the differences between the models. Consult with people and consult with colleagues in the industry, because generally industries are facing similar things. Also consult with people who are outside the industry, but are also in the space of running, you know, PMOs. Do your research. There's so much information on this. It's really easy to do your research. Attend discussion panels like this. You know, Google anything. There's so much information about what has been a success and what hasn't been a success. So many learnings to share. But again, come back to it, take that into account, and then think about, well, what is going to be best for my business? So use these sources of information and guides as starting points, because you really don't want to be reinventing the wheel. Okay, there's a lot of research there that can actually help you get off the ground. The third point is think about PMO or portfolio management or even program management as a capability. What I mean by that is, if we take this picture here, on the right side of this picture, and this is not extensive either, right? This is off the top of my head. These are some of the sub-capabilities that probably go into portfolio management. And you can see there's a whole range of things there. And there'll be people out there today saying, oh, that shouldn't be there, or you're missing this. And that's probably true, right? But these are some of the things that when setting up portfolio management functions, you might consider including. What you should do then, once you've got a list of all the things, is then work out what is really critical and how best could that be delivered, taken into account, like I said, the ecosystem and the business strategy and the business situation. So going back to those 5 different business situations, if you're in a turnaround scenario, governance management is probably not that important, because the governance is going to come down from the top, and there's going to be a very clear direction to get on with the job. Otherwise, we all fail. So putting up extensive governance frameworks and models in different forums and meetings is probably not going to really be all that effective. Probably what would be effective in that scenario would be prioritization. So in that scenario, probably prioritization would be your number one priority. If you're going through what were some of the others? The others were, say, a startup, for example. If you're going into a startup scenario, delivery management is probably, or release planning is probably quite critical. How do we move things out into production very quickly without tripping over each other? So take all those things into account and highlight which ones you think are the critical. And it may only just be one thing. If you get one thing, that's a starting point. It doesn't need to be the be all and end all. But also, like I said, think about it as a capability. So all these functions, if you pick 3 or 4 functions that you think are important, these 3 or 4 functions don't have to belong under the one group. They can be in other parts of the organization. The key then would be, how do you link those other parts of the organization? Pardon me. How do you link up with those other parts of the organization so you have an end-to-end process? Give me a moment, sorry. And how do you build relationships with those other areas so that you can become effective partners? So that's when you think about it as a capability. As long as the organisation has this capability somewhere, the processes and the parties are in agreement and are in alignment, you can still deliver the value. So the PMO in this case just becomes a facilitator or facilitating those cross-functional processes. An example there would be something like strategy translation. If you have a very strong strategy group in your organisation and they're very good at articulating the strategy and turning those strategies into a set of programs to go forward, then what you might want to do from a portfolio management function is be involved, but not directing the strategy translation. You'll still want to be a part of that. And because you'll have to receive the output, because maybe the next step then is to go through prioritisation, and that's the role of the portfolio office. So you'd want to be a part of it. So you just need to work out the relationships and making sure that the processes are integrated. You don't want your strategy team to pull together something that you can't use, I guess is the key message. But again, when you look at that, there are countless possible combinations and variations. But the important thing is that you highlight what adds value and what's important for that organisation in that organisational context. So you make it fit for business. I hope you're writing down lots of questions. I hope they're starting to make some sense. So that's really my things to think about around making a PMO fit for business. And again, the three things to really consider: the ecosystem, use best practice models as guides, and trying to think of a portfolio management as a capability, not so much as a business unit. You don't all have to do it within one central team. It can be dispersed around an organisation. So if you take those three things into account, my hypothesis is you've got a better chance of building a PMO that is best for business. And as such, you've got a better chance of adding value and meaning that you will be around and become a valuable part of the organisation. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about some of the lessons I have personally learned in times when I've done this myself. And I want to allow for a good maybe 15 minutes or so for some questions. So what are some of the lessons I've learned? Number one, speak a language that the business will understand. Us in the portfolio space, program management space, project delivery space, we have our own language. And that doesn't mean that the business is going to understand that language. And in some organizations where they have quite mature project and portfolio management functions, they understand the language. But if you're not in that scenario, you need to adapt and you need to adopt what you're saying in the language you're speaking to actually fit with the business. Because if the business don't understand you, it just isn't going to work. And I'll give you a really good example on the next slide. This is a portfolio management dashboard that myself and my team put together in a previous organisation. We thought it was the bee's knees. As you can see, there's lots of good tiles. It seems to be nicely formatted. It's got all sorts of information on it about resources and the high issues and risks and how the performance financially, any issues in terms of governance, how the milestone tracking going, how the projects or initiatives tracking across the particular life cycle. We thought this was great. I remember the first time I went to present this to the executive team, I was very excited about it. I thought I was going to get lots of great feedback, presented it up, and I got, yep, you guessed it, crickets. The exec team couldn't quite understand what I was showing them, and they couldn't understand the importance of it. For a portfolio professional, this might be valuable information, but for the audience I was presenting to, it just didn't hit. It just didn't actually gel with that particular team, because I hadn't really taken the time to consider what was important for them and what is it that they will understand. So what I got from them was a big so what. So I guess the lessons learned there. We ended up reshaping the whole dashboard and the whole report completely, and eventually found something that they found very useful and that they could understand. But we spent quite a bit of time, as you can probably imagine, putting this together. So that's basically lesson number one. Lesson number two, give your team a name that will resonate with the business. You don't have to call it a PMO. You don't have to call it Portfolio Management Office. There's so many other words that you could use, and use words that will resonate. So you might, if the organisation is very financially based, for an example, you might call it the investment prioritization unit or something, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, projects and initiatives are an investment, and what the business is looking for is a return on that investment. So think about what the business does. Think about, you know, what language do they understand, and try and come up with a name for the team that will actually resonate, that they will actually start to think that will actually work for them. I know it's a bit of marketing, but if you stick PMO on a team, in some organisations, it drums up a lot of negative sentiments. And if that's the case in a particular organisation that you're working in today, then don't call it a PMO. Come up with something that you think would really work. And that comes back down to what value are you going to create? So once you've determined what value you're going to deliver, then focus the aim around that particular value. Lesson number 3, find one problem that the business is struggling with and fix it. This is quite important in your startup mode. So if you are establishing the actual function or the capability and you're trying to get that traction, just find, it can be any problem. It doesn't have to be a PMO problem. It can be any problem that the business is actually struggling with, and solve it for them. Facilitate it, use the capabilities that you have in your team to get out and help the business through that. It might be that they're just not very good at starting projects or something to that effect. So find one problem and go out and actually fix it for them. And you start getting that traction. Leverage what works well in an organization. So this is kind of related to number 3, but this basically means if you can find something in that organization that works well, leverage it. So if there's something that everybody loves about the organization, it may be that they are very good at articulating strategy, for example, or they might be very good at procurement or whatever. They might have a strength in a particular area. Find how you can actually leverage that existing process, build on it, not replace it, not challenge it, but actually build on it. And again, it goes back to helping solve some of the business problems. The example I had in a particular organization was they had quite a robust business planning process, and going from strategy into business planning. It acted on an annual cycle. There was a lot of detail put into the business planning processes. That planning went through, and there was a really strong performance review set of processes as well. So we found some value. Something that probably wasn't working so well was what happened after the planning cycle was completed, and sometime between the planning cycle and the performance review cycle. So we noticed there was a bit of a gap there. So we leveraged the strength of the process, and all that we do was tinker with it and add it to it by adding a quarterly business planning review process. So just by tinkering with something that worked very well, we were able to get some traction. And this actually did work well, feeding into the portfolio management function and the implementation element as well. But I guess the key message there is, you need to find traction, and these are some ways that you can actually get that particular traction. And lastly, focus on what the business defines as value. Don't underestimate the word as value, but you need to understand what value that organisation does deliver. And that is unique in every situation. So also think about the fact that when you're establishing a PMO, or if an executive in your organisation has said, we're going to establish a PMO, they have had to fund that PMO. To fund that PMO, they have probably taken money out of somebody else or some other areas of the organisation. The money just doesn't appear. And then made a conscious decision to invest that money in establishing this particular function. They're going to want to see a return on that function. They're going to want to see a return on the value. So if you can't define what your value that you're bringing to the organisation, you're not going to be able to demonstrate that you've returned that to the organisation, and therefore you're not going to be able to get traction. If the value is financial, because they may be going through cost reduction, show a financial return. You've invested X amount in the PMO. I'm giving you the business back X plus Y. If it is about customer centricity, show how you've delivered or you show how you've improved customer centricity in the organisation. So you kind of get what I mean. These are just some of the 5 simple things that I guess in reflection, if I thought about deeper and I thought about better, I probably would have had a much easier scenario in setting up a PMO when I've actually done it in the past. So I hope sharing some of these with you, and some of these probably are very basic, and probably some of you are probably saying, yep, that sounds very obvious. But I hope with sharing some of these with you, that you'll actually be able to take them away. And if you're in the situation of changing your PMO or re-establishing your PMO or setting it up from scratch, that you take some of these sort of things into account, into your actual thinking process. Just to end the discussion, then we'll go into some questions and answers, I hope, and some robust discussion. Look, if one thing that we learn in delivering projects and programs and managing portfolios, there's always a road of failure before you actually get to success. But don't let that discourage you. Continually push forward. There's just an opportunity to learn. And like I said, I've given you some of my own learnings, and I can tell you I've learned the hard way as well. And there's probably many times I've gone, well, that didn't work well. But reflect on that and go, right, how do we now actually shift that? It's never too late to actually change it and to actually move it forward. So Louise, that went quite quick. I managed to get that through quickly. I'm happy to go back over any particular slides if I went through them too quickly. But I did want to leave some time for some questions. So I really hope, Louise, there were some questions there.
Yeah, so I've certainly got a question. I'll go and enable people's microphones. So if they have a question, they are more than welcome to ask. But I'll start if that's okay, because I think a lot of your advice is just really on point, Michael. This issue of value is one that certainly in my daily life I come up against over and over again. It's the root of the problem of many PMO. What strikes me about you, though, I think in the time that we've known each other, which I think is a couple of years now, you've been able to operate as a PMO leader, essentially, although that might not have been the title, at a fairly senior level. I know from our conversations, you're well connected to the executive team, for example. That's not always the case for PMO leaders. So I'm keen on your thoughts on what advice would you give to the PMO leaders who don't necessarily straight away have that level of influence or the ear of the leadership team?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Look, it just comes down to understanding who your internal customers are. So in that case, for me, my internal customers were the exec team of that particular organisation. But if your internal customers are a head of business, or you work across a couple of different functions, maybe you're closely aligned to the digital side of the organisation. You might sit within finance, you might sit within the strategy team, you might sit within the actual digital space. And understand who your customers are. And again, it comes back to what do they see as value in delivering it to them. So whether it's an executive team or whether it's a bit lower down in the layers, it's still important to understand the context that the organisation operates in. It's still important to understand what does your customer see as value. So the thing not to do, to sort of turn it into a what not to do. Don't pick up the best practice guides and go, right, that's my PMO, I need to set up a PMO that looks like that. First thing you should do is, who are you delivering to, and go and talk to them first. What are they struggling with? What do they need help with? What do they think is really valuable for this organisation? Why do you think PMOs in the past haven't been able to get traction? Just speak to your key stakeholders, because developing those relationships will help you get that particular traction. And so once you understand their needs, then you can go to the best practice guides and go, well, okay, what I heard was they just want reporting that they can trust. Simple thing. So, right, okay, how do I best deliver reporting and focus on one particular thing. So you don't need to be influencing an executive team. You don't, in my particular case, I was influencing the direction of the transformation portfolio. You just might be trying to improve the success rate of particular projects within that portfolio, or you just might be trying to lift the lid on what is actually happening through reporting. So just understand what the business really wants.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. Let's hear from our audience now. Does anybody have any questions for Michael or any comments? Nirav, you should be able to speak now if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thanks, Lucy. Just have a question. Michael, you mentioned earlier that most of the PMOs, got a short span, and I guess that's one of the problem statement that most of the PMOs don't last longer. So, as per your experiences, what are the major causes behind failure of those PMOs? Thanks.
Yeah, look, again, it depends in any sort of organisation, but from my experience is just failure to demonstrate that you can blend into the organisation. If some of the things that can go wrong, like I said, you focus on the best practice models. The best practice models will say you need to implement a stage gate and a robust reporting processes, right? So let's say that's out of a best practice model. You need to have all these things. So PMO goes in there, tries to establish these, not understanding that you're working in a highly siloed organisation. And if you're working in a highly siloed organisation, if you haven't developed the relationships first, nobody's going to give you a status report. So you might spend 6 months trying to influence the business in delivering project status reports, and you come up with zilch. So then people start to question, well, what are you guys doing? I haven't seen anything. You haven't actually been able to deliver. I've invested X amount of money and you haven't been able to deliver. So it really just comes down to, if you're not delivering some sort of value, if you're not delivering a return on the investment, people are going to start to question, why did the PMO get that money? You can give me that money and I can deliver things better for you. That's typically what can happen. So don't get too, that's why I keep harping on, there's so many things that can go wrong, but if you're delivering one thing and that is proven to be value for the organisation, at least you got a foot in the door. So don't go in there, I guess, and again, this is from my experiences, right? So don't go in there and try to say, right, this is what best practice is, and I need to build a resource planning framework. I need a massive PPM system so I can track all the projects, and I need risk and issue processes and procedures, and I need a prioritization process with agreed, weightings and etc. Because if you go away and build all that, you can spend 6 months, probably 12 months building it, and while you're building it, you're not delivering value, right? Yeah. So it's just like anything else. If you're starting it from scratch, what are the quick wins that you can deliver? What are some simple problems you can solve straight off the bat, and actually, start to develop some rapport, start to develop a reputation for making some positive change, and you've got a much better opportunity. And look, I can speak from an example. I did that in an organisation. Here's the best practice model. This is what we should be doing. Tried to put it in, and it just bounced like a tennis ball. Just didn't stick at all, right? So we had to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So thanks for insight. So just another question leaning back to the first one. So what's the emerging trend? Do you see, Michael? More and more organizations are opting for PMOs, or it's other way around, that organizations or the enterprises are trying to move away from.
I don't think there's any. I think it's just horses for courses. But and I don't think it really matters. I don't think it really matters if organisations have them or not. If they've made a conscious decision that they are going to have it for a particular reason, then focus on delivering to that. If organisations believe they don't need them, then that's up to them. And it may be different between industries, but if you think about it, if you think about what's really driving, if you asked a whole bunch of CEOs what keeps them awake at night, they would probably come up with things like, how do I become agile? How do I operate in an agile environment? How do I protect my business from shocks? How do I make sure that we have that we're able to move with the times and produce products at a much faster rate. If a PMO can add value in that scenario to a CEO, absolutely.
I think Neil, it's a great question. I think what we see in the marketplace is there's certainly no reduction in organizations who are setting up and rebooting PMOs. I mean, that's a lot of what we actually do for core business is set up and reset. What is different, and I think this will be a trend that goes on, is the value streams that those PMOs are looking at. So if you are in a more strategic type of PMO, then prioritization and portfolio management still very, very important. But the more delivery focused PMOs are very much in the space of trying to work out how they incorporate agility into waterfall governance processes. So that's probably the biggest trend that we see over the last 2 years in particular, I guess, and it seems to be getting more and more prevalent.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thanks, both of you.
Yeah, thanks. Other questions?
There must be some more questions.
There must be some questions. It's not like you not to have questions, Amira.
No, thank you. Great to see Michael here. How are you, Michael, by the way? Well, I like the idea that you said that some companies don't like to be called as PMO. We both know which companies they are, don't we?
Yeah. and it's just because it can just be based on what's happened in the organization in the past. But
yes.
Like I said, if you think about PMO as a capability, and you think about really honing on value, what is the value? What value do you need to deliver? And then you go, right, well, if that's what we are delivering, why don't we call ourselves that?
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't need to be the be all and end all. It doesn't need to be all those separate, capabilities. It can just be a couple of things. And so then call yourselves that, because it will resonate with the business. It will actually stand out. And if it connects with the business, your job's half done.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true.
Yep.
Thanks, Louise and Michael, both of you. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Amira, for coming. Any other questions or comments for Michael? No. Well, thank you very much, Michael. That was really, I think, timely for a lot of us to just have a refresh over some of those principles. As I say, it is a problem that a lot of PMOs are dealing with. Before we go, just a heads up on a couple of things from us. So we are actually running our first value-added PMO training course. It's a one-day training session, and it'll be running on the 2nd of March, face-to-face, everything crossed. And it really deals with some of the things that Michael has been talking to. So if you have any interest in that, please have a look at the website. The training program for next year will be formally launched shortly. And also watch out for our State of the PMO 2020 survey, which will be doing the rounds probably mid-November. So if nobody else has any questions or comments, we'll call it a day. We will, these slides will be available for distribution, Michael, is that correct? And of course, we will send you guys a copy of the reporting too. So thanks, Michael. Thanks everybody for joining us. And yeah, we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thanks.
See you guys. Bye.